What began as whispers in palace corridors erupted into a storm when Catherine finally broke her silence. For years, Camilla's words had painted a picture of loyalty and sacrifice, a narrative carefully built to portray herself as the unifying figure in a fractured monarchy. But Catherine's truth landed like thunder, exposing the cracks beneath that polished image. She had carried the burden quietly, watching as lies seeped into every conversation, every public appearance, every decision made within the family. But silence has its limits, and Catherine chose her moment with precision, revealing a truth so devastating it would shatter the monarchy's delicate façade and alter the course of its future. The core of her revelation was not an opinion, but evidence documents hidden within archives that contradicted Camilla's carefully constructed version of events. These were not whispers or rumors. These were cold, undeniable words, inked on official papers that proved Camilla had exaggerated her influence, twisted her role, and painted Catherine in a shadow that was never hers to bear. It was a betrayal so deep that when Catherine placed these truths before the inner circle of the royal household, silence fell like a hammer. Advisors who had once bowed to Camilla's authority sat frozen, their eyes darting between Catherine's calm resolve and Camilla's pale disbelief. Catherine's voice, steady but sharp, cut through the silence. She spoke not only of herself, but of the monarchy's integrity, reminding everyone present that lies left unchecked grow into rot. She invoked the memory of Queen Elizabeth, the late sovereign whose strength had been rooted in truth and duty, not manipulation. Catherine aligned herself with that legacy, positioning herself as the guardian of the values the Queen had held sacred. It was a reminder to the court that Camilla's words could not erase Elizabeth's vision of a monarchy built on resilience and honesty. William, though quiet, stood as Catherine's shadow of strength. His silence was not passive but deliberate, a powerful statement that his loyalty was not with those who twisted the truth, but with his wife, the woman who now carried the weight of the monarchy's moral compass. His presence beside her reminded everyone that this was not just Catherine's stand, it was theirs together, united, unbroken, and unafraid. Camilla, for once, found herself cornered. She had thrived in battles, fought with words, her sharp tongue and carefully chosen phrases often enough to win favor or silence critics. But this was different. This was Catherine wielding facts, documents, and evidence that Camilla could not easily dismiss. Her expressions, her attempts to interject, faltered under the cold reality Catherine had laid bare. For the first time, her power slipped not by public scandal, but by the strength of a woman she had underestimated. The atmosphere inside the palace shifted. Where once Camilla's narrative had dominated, Catherine's defiance now lit the room with a different kind of power. She had not only defended herself, but had exposed the false foundation upon which Camilla's authority rested. It was a turning point. No one could have predicted a daughter-in-law daring to confront the queen consort with truths too heavy to be ignored. The monarchy, already fragile under public scrutiny, now trembled under the weight of a new storm. But Catherine's revelation was only the beginning. What came next would force King Charles to make the most brutal decision of his reign. For years, Camilla built her power on carefully crafted stories. But Catherine exposed how those lies weren't harmless. They were weapons designed to silence, exclude, and manipulate. Behind closed doors, whispers spread that Catherine was too fragile, too hesitant, too overwhelmed to carry the weight of her royal duties. Camilla's words, spoken softly but repeated often, etched themselves into the corridors of the palace until they became accepted as truth. It was a narrative that chipped away at Catherine's reputation, designed not only to undermine her, but to elevate Camilla as the steady hand guiding a monarchy on the brink. These whispers did not stop with Catherine. They reached into the very heart of the monarchy's most painful history, Diana. Camilla painted herself as the reluctant peacemaker, the one who had quietly borne the crown's storms, the one who had softened the fractures left by Diana's legacy. She spoke of sacrifice, of patience, of resilience, framing herself as the bridge between the past and the present. But Catherine knew this was not the truth. Diana's memory was not a wound for Camilla to exploit. It was a legacy for Catherine to honor. The lies twisted the image of Diana's struggle into a backdrop for Camilla's own rise, and Catherine would not allow that distortion to stand unchallenged. The deception spread further still, weaving into Camilla's most calculated whisper campaign, that William and Catherine were unfit to modernize the crown. Camilla suggested that their vision was naive, their determination fragile, their appeal more about image than substance. To the older aristocracy, who feared change, such narratives were convincing. They cast doubt on the couple's ability to lead the monarchy into the future, sowing seeds of mistrust even within the royal household itself. Yet what Camilla failed to anticipate was Catherine's quiet strength, her ability to listen, to wait, and to strike only when the truth could no longer be denied. When Catherine began to dismantle Camilla's fabrications, she did so with precision. She confronted each falsehood, not with anger, but with evidence. One by one, the carefully stacked stories fell apart. The portrait of a weak Catherine was erased by her tireless devotion to duty, her undeniable popularity with the public, and her quiet command in moments of crisis. The distortion of Diana's legacy crumbled when Catherine reminded the court, through her actions and her words, that honoring the late princess meant embodying compassion and dignity, not rewriting her story to suit another's ambitions. And the notion of being unfit to modernize was silenced by the undeniable truth that the younger generation looked to William and Catherine as the very symbols of renewal. The palace staff, long torn between loyalty and fear, found themselves shaken as Catherine's revelations spread. Those who had once bowed their heads to Camilla's influence began to question what they had believed. Some felt guilt for remaining silent. Others felt relief that the truth had finally surfaced. Yet the cost of deception was now clear to all. The monarchy itself had been poisoned by lies that distorted its soul. And in that moment, the contrast between truth and deceit stood in sharp, undeniable light. But if Catherine's words struck like a sword, Charles's next move would cut deeper still, one that no royal in modern history had dared. For King Charles, the lies weren't just Camilla's, they became his shame. Catherine's revelations left him cornered, forced to face the deception within his own marriage. As the evidence unfolded before him, silence wrapped itself around the room. Charles did not interrupt, he did not defend. His eyes lingered on the papers Catherine presented, the weight of each word pressing down on him like iron chains. Every line revealed a falsehood. Every claim tore deeper into the fragile trust he had once placed in Camilla. In that stillness, the king felt the walls of his reign closing in, the echoes of truth too sharp to ignore. The moment was more than political, it was personal. In the silence, memories of his late mother stirred. Queen Elizabeth had built her reign on resilience, discretion, and a refusal to allow private turmoil to destroy public duty. Charles had watched her navigate storms with an iron hand hidden in velvet. Now, as he listened to Catherine's steady voice unravel the deceptions, he felt her shadow standing behind him, judging, reminding him of the oath he had sworn to protect the crown at all costs. For the first time since her passing, he wondered if he had already failed her legacy. His heart was divided, torn between love and responsibility. Camilla had been his confidant, his partner in battles both public and private, the woman he had defended against a world that once despised her. Yet, as Catherine's truth filled the room, Charles could not deny the sting of betrayal. The lies Camilla spun had not only harmed Catherine, they had compromised him. His crown, his reign, his very image as sovereign, had been entangled in her web. Duty demanded he act for the monarchy's survival, but emotion anchored him to a woman he could not simply discard. The conflict within him threatened to crush him, leaving him paralyzed between two impossible choices. Advisors, sensing his hesitation, pressed forward. They reminded him that the monarchy was not his alone. It was the heart of the nation, and the world was always watching. Catherine's revelations would not remain confined to palace walls. Soon the press would seize on them, and silence would be seen as weakness. They urged him to protect the institution, to show strength, to sever the infection before it consumed the crown entirely. Their words stung like fire, stripping him of the illusion that time might resolve the crisis. Then came a moment so symbolic, it would haunt him forever. Among the papers Catherine had revealed, Charles found himself holding two items together: a private letter Diana had once written, and the evidence Catherine had brought forward. In his hands lay the past and the present, two women bound by truth, each exposing the dangers of deception. Diana's words of pain, of betrayal, of enduring lies, echoed as if spoken again, now amplified by Catherine's calm but devastating proof. The weight of it all broke something deep inside him, and Charles felt the cruel symmetry of history repeating itself. The king could no longer deny it. The betrayal was not abstract, it was real, carved into ink and memory, pressed into the very fabric of his reign. His silence, his hesitation, his years of defending Camilla had allowed the lies to take root, and poison the monarchy. For the first time, he acknowledged not only Camilla's deception, but his own weakness in failing to stop it. And in that moment, the king's heart broke not just as a husband, but as a sovereign forced to recognize the cost of misplaced loyalty. And so, in a moment few could have imagined, Charles reached for the one weapon left in his hand, royal exile. History was written in ink that day. With Catherine watching in silent strength, Charles signed the exile papers documents that would strip Camilla of her authority and banish her from the heart of power. The moment was both solemn and electrifying, for these were not ordinary papers, but the kind of decree that carried the full weight of monarchy behind it. Exile was not a punishment handed down lightly. It was a tool reserved for those whose presence threatened the integrity of the crown itself. And now, it was being turned against the very woman Charles once vowed to defend, making the act all the more staggering. The gravity of the moment was intensified by the king's hesitation. His hand hovered above the page, the pen trembling slightly as though weighed down by the ghosts of his choices. Charles had always been torn between love and duty, but never before had the two clashed so violently. Signing meant betraying the woman who had stood beside him through scandal and scorn. Refusing meant betraying the monarchy itself. The silence in the room was deafening, each second stretching into eternity, until the pen finally touched parchment, dragging its ink across words that would redefine not only Camilla's future, but his own. Catherine did not speak, nor did she flinch. Her composure was icy, unyielding, the stillness of someone who understood that history was being forged in front of her. She had fought for truth, exposed the lies, and now she watched as the final seal of justice was pressed against them. Her silence was not weakness, it was power. It told the court, the advisors, and Charles himself that this was not her victory alone, but the monarchy reclaiming its honor. In that moment, Catherine became more than a princess. She became the living embodiment of resilience against deception. Camilla, however, was struck as though by lightning. Stunned disbelief washed over her face as reality sank in. Her worst nightmare had crossed from whispered threat into brutal reality. For decades, she had survived the scorn of the public, the doubts of the press, even the wrath of Diana's shadow. But she had never faced exile, never believed Charles would have the courage to wield such a weapon against her. The documents stripped her not only of titles and influence, but of the very identity she had fought so long to secure. And though she said nothing in that instant, her silence carried an unspoken promise of vengeance. Around the room, advisors murmured quietly, not about the details, but the symbolism of the act. For centuries, royal decrees had shaped kingdoms and toppled dynasties, and now this one joined that infamous lineage. It would be remembered as the day Charles placed the monarchy above his marriage, the day a queen consort was cast aside, not by scandal alone, but by the stroke of a pen. The act was more than administrative, it was judgment, and its symbolism rippled like thunder across the institution. When the papers were sealed, the sound echoed with finality. It marked a turning point for the crown, a moment when lies met their reckoning, and truth forced the throne to confront its own fragility. There was no undoing what had been done, no path back to the way things were before Catherine spoke her truth. For Charles, for Catherine, and for Camilla, the future had been reshaped forever, etched in signatures and sealed in wax. But exile on paper was one thing, living with its humiliation in public was another, and Camilla was far from accepting defeat. Camilla had been humiliated before, but never like this. Stripped of authority, her fury shook every corner of the palace, igniting a firestorm no one could contain. For a woman who had clawed her way from the margins of scandal into the throne room itself, the sting of exile was unbearable. She did not collapse in silence. She erupted, and her rage was not the quiet despair of one defeated. It was the venom of a woman who refused to be erased. Her first confrontation was with Charles. The man she once believed would shield her against every storm had become, in her eyes, the executioner of her reign. Her voice, sharp and unrelenting, tore through their private chambers as she hurled accusations of betrayal. She demanded to know how a king, her king, could sign away her place with a flick of his pen. To Camilla, this was not just a political decision, it was a personal annihilation, a betrayal more intimate than any the monarchy had endured. Charles, heavy with the guilt of his choice, could offer no defense that would soothe the wound. His silence only deepened her rage. Her venom then turned toward Catherine. In Camilla's eyes, the younger woman was no longer a dutiful daughter-in-law, but a usurper, a schemer, cloaked in quiet dignity. She branded Catherine as the orchestrator of her downfall, accusing her of weaponizing truth to steal what was never hers. The words dripped with contempt, the tone laced with the desperation of a queen consort who suddenly saw her throne slip from beneath her. To those who overheard, it was a shocking glimpse into the bitterness festering beneath the surface of Camilla's carefully polished image. But fury does not exist in isolation. In the aristocracy's grand halls, whispers began to stir. Old allies, those who had quietly benefited from Camilla's rise, wondered if exile was too extreme. They whispered of rebellion not in open defiance, but in murmured doubts that carried their own kind of danger. Some believed Catherine's victory was too sharp, too decisive, and feared that such upheaval could unravel the fragile balance of power. These murmurs, though faint, became the background hum to Camilla's rage, fueling her sense that she still had allies in the shadows. Camilla herself, unwilling to be silenced, began to issue threats. She warned that if the monarchy turned its back on her, she would not hesitate to reveal secrets that could tarnish not only Catherine and William, but the very crown itself. Her threats to go to the press sent a chill through those who heard them, for no one doubted she possessed the kind of knowledge that could shatter reputations and reignite old scandals. The monarchy, already reeling, trembled at the thought of another storm breaking in full public view. The personal rift between Charles and Camilla widened into an unbridgeable chasm. Where once there had been partnership, now there was only bitterness. He was the king who signed away her power. She was the consort who threatened to burn the monarchy from within. Their bond, forged through decades of shared struggle, fractured under the weight of exile and fury. It was not just a marriage unraveling, it was the monarchy itself, at risk of splintering, as private wars spilled into public consequence. The sense was undeniable. The crown itself might fracture under the weight of her rage. What had begun as Catherine's revelation now threatened to spiral into chaos that could consume them all. The monarchy stood on a knife's edge, torn between truth and vengeance, loyalty and survival. Yet, while Camilla raged, Catherine understood that the battle was not yet won, for every lie exposed. New shadows emerged to threaten her. Behind her calm exterior, Catherine carried the weight of 1,000 eyes. She had exposed the lies, but now she stood isolated, vulnerable to the storm that followed. Though the exile papers bore Charles's seal, it was Catherine whom the palace whispers blamed. To Camilla's allies, she was not a defender of truth, but the architect of humiliation. In their eyes, she had stripped a queen consort of her power, and vengeance would surely follow. Each corridor held shadows, each glance carried suspicion, and Catherine could feel the sting of eyes watching her every move. Fear was never a weakness, she admitted aloud, but deep within, she knew the danger was real. Camilla still had allies, aristocrats, old family friends, courtiers who had benefited from her influence. Catherine feared the knives they carried would not always be visible. A whisper to the press, a scandal fabricated from shadows, a betrayal waiting in silence. These were the weapons she now had to guard against. Even victory felt fragile, for she knew Camilla's exile was not the end, but the spark of a war that might yet consume her. And yet, through the darkness, she felt the steady presence of William. He was her anchor, her constant, the voice that whispered in the quiet hours that they were not fighting for themselves, but for the future of the crown. His reassurance reminded her of the promise they had made long before the storm to protect not just their family, but the monarchy's very soul. His hand in hers was not a gesture of comfort alone. It was a vow, unspoken yet unbreakable. And though she feared the storm gathering beyond the walls, she drew strength from knowing she did not face it alone. Still, the toll weighed heavily. For all her strength, Catherine could not escape the crushing reality that the world now saw her as the woman who broke the monarchy. The press had already begun its ruthless campaign, twisting exile into a battle of Catherine versus Camilla. Headlines painted her as the ruthless victor, the ambitious daughter-in-law who toppled a queen consort. Every article, every photo, every rumor cast her in the role of destroyer rather than defender. It was not truth, but perception that ruled. And Catherine knew perception could be more dangerous than any lie Camilla had ever spun. Late at night, walking the same halls where Diana once wept, Catherine found herself haunted by the similarities. Diana too had stood alone against whispers, crushed by a system that mistook compassion for weakness and independence for rebellion. Catherine understood now, more than ever, the loneliness that had consumed her mother-in-law. The walls that once gleamed with power now felt like a prison of silence, a reminder that truth comes with a cost few could ever bear. But Catherine also knew she had crossed a line she could never retreat from. By exposing Camilla, she had lit a fuse that burned far beyond her control. It would not stop with Exile. It would ignite divisions in the palace, widen cracks in the monarchy, and unleash battles she could not yet imagine. The truth had been set free, but it carried consequences no one could contain. And as the tension grew unbearable, it was Charles himself who would deliver the most shocking twist yet. Charles could no longer contain the collapse of his family. The king who once wanted unity now became the executioner of his own house. The burden was unbearable, pressing into his very soul with a force that made every breath feel like betrayal. He had spent his life yearning to be understood, to be accepted, to be seen not as the heir overshadowed by giants, but as a monarch capable of healing wounds. Yet here he stood, watching his own choices turn to ash. The lies that Catherine exposed were no longer Camilla's alone. They had become his burden, his shame, his undoing. It was to Princess Anne, the sister who had seen him in triumph and torment, that Charles finally confessed his regret. In the quiet of their private exchange, he admitted that perhaps he had been blind. Perhaps his heart had led him down a path that duty could never sustain. Anne, ever the realist, listened with the steel of someone who had long suspected this reckoning would come. Her silence cut deeper than any words, for it reminded him that truth had always been there, he had simply chosen not to face it. In that moment, Charles realized that his downfall was not only Camilla's lies, but his own refusal to see them sooner. Haunting him was the specter of his past, the fear that he was repeating the same mistakes that had once shattered Diana's life. Every decision seemed to carry her shadow. Every hesitation felt like a betrayal of the woman the world still revered as the true Queen of Hearts. Diana's ghost lingered in every thought, a relentless reminder that history does not forgive those who fail to learn from it. Charles felt her presence pressing down on him, not in anger but in sorrow, as though the pain of yesterday had found its echo in today. Doubt gnawed at him relentlessly. Had love blinded him? Had his devotion to Camilla, built over decades of defiance, shielded him from seeing her ambition for what it truly was? He wondered if he had mistaken comfort for truth, loyalty for manipulation, companionship for control. For the first time, Charles saw his marriage not as destiny fulfilled, but as a chain that bound him to a future his crown could not withstand. His trust had not only endangered him, it had endangered the monarchy itself. Behind closed doors, the mask finally broke. The king who appeared stoic in public wept in private. Tears fell for his mother's legacy, for Diana's memory, for the crown he had sworn to protect, yet now felt he had betrayed. It was an emotional collapse, not of weakness, but of unbearable recognition. Charles was not only a husband forced to confront betrayal, he was a sovereign, realizing the monarchy's survival might demand the ultimate personal sacrifice. Around him, advisors pressed for action. They reminded him that exile was only the beginning, that to preserve the crown's integrity, Camilla's removal must be permanent and complete. They warned that hesitation would only embolden her, that mercy could unravel everything Catherine had fought to restore. Their words pierced through his grief, forcing him to face the reality he had tried so desperately to avoid. The monarchy could not endure both Camilla's lies and his silence. And so, with trembling hands, Charles prepared the final act that would forever sever Camilla from the monarchy's future. The day Camilla's exile was enforced, the palace walls seemed to close in. Catherine's triumph was bittersweet, for she knew this was not victory, it was survival. What unfolded was a scene that carried the weight of centuries, a reminder that even within the monarchy, power could be stripped in an instant. Camilla was escorted away from the official royal chambers, her departure quiet, but suffocating in its symbolism. The woman who had once occupied the throne beside Charles was now removed from the center of royal life, her influence erased with the stroke of a pen and the force of authority. It was exile not in distance, but in essence, banishment from the beating heart of power. Outside the palace gates, the world erupted. Headlines screamed of banishment. Tabloids framed it as the greatest scandal since Diana's tragedy, and broadcasters reported on every breath taken inside those gilded halls. The exile was not just a private act, it became a public spectacle. For the first time, the monarchy was forced to display its fractures on the world stage, and the press devoured every detail. The narrative spun wildly, but through the chaos, one truth stood tall. Catherine had emerged as the unwavering figure who defended the monarchy's integrity when no one else dared. Her image, once painted by Camilla's lies as fragile and uncertain, now became the very embodiment of strength. Catherine's face graced the front pages, not as a silent consort, but as a symbol of resilience. She had not simply weathered the storm, she had redirected it. The people saw in her a woman who placed truth above convenience, who bore the cost of confrontation, and who stood unbroken despite the fire aimed against her. The public rallied behind her, finding in Catherine not only a princess but a guardian of the crown's future. At her side, William stood in silent defiance. He did not need to shout or explain. His presence alone sent the message that their unity was unshakable, that the bond between them was a shield against the storms threatening the monarchy. Where Charles wavered, William stood firm. Where Camilla faltered, Catherine rose. Together, they represented not only survival, but the renewal of a monarchy that seemed, for once, aligned with the people's sense of justice. The monarchy itself was redefined overnight. Where there had been doubt, there was now clarity. The public, weary of deception, sided with Catherine's integrity and embraced her as the moral compass of the institution. Advisors, once hesitant, began to shift allegiance, knowing the tide of history had changed direction. And yet, beneath the relief, there remained unease, for exile is not an ending, it is a beginning. Every act of banishment carries with it the risk of retaliation, of return, of lingering shadows that do not easily fade. In the palace, silence fell heavy after Camilla's departure. It was as though the walls, long strained under tension, exhaled at last. The corridors, once filled with her voice, now lay eerily still, and the absence was as chilling as her presence had once been overpowering. Catherine felt the weight of it deeply. She knew exile might have ended the lies, but it had not ended the war. The void Camilla left behind was not peace, it was the hollow calm before the next storm. But exile does not end a war, it only sets the stage for the battles yet to come. And Catherine knew Camilla's shadow still lingered. With Camilla gone, the nation turned its eyes to Catherine, the woman who dared to expose lies and protect the monarchy's soul. But triumph often carries its own curse. In the eyes of the public, she had become more than a princess. She was now the moral anchor of the crown, the figure who restored dignity when others faltered. Her composure, her resilience, her refusal to bend under pressure, these became the foundation upon which a new era was being built. At her side, William declared their united commitment to carrying Diana's legacy forward, ensuring that compassion and truth would shape the monarchy's path. Together, they symbolized not only survival but transformation. The monarchy, long scarred by scandal and division, seemed ready to turn a corner. Yet, even as this new chapter began, uncertainty lingered. Would Camilla, cast into exile, accept her fate, or would her hunger for power drive her to seek revenge from the shadows? And what of the secrets still buried within the royal archives? Are truths too dangerous to surface, but too potent to remain hidden forever? Catherine now stood on the edge of history, revered as a heroine, yet haunted by the battles she had waged. Her triumph was undeniable, but the cost was etched into her soul. And so the world waited, because in the monarchy, truth is never final, and exile is never the end. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.